Hey guys, hey ladies, hey friends, hey foes. We just wanted to take a second to remind you that while we're okay swearing when little ears are listening, you might not be, and that's okay. So here's your chance to pause us and wait for nap time, or pop in your earbuds. We hope you enjoy the episode.
My favorite thing to talk about. Like, I've been so excited to talk about it all day that I've been like running around, and my kids are like, "What's up?" And I was just like, "We're gonna talk about medicine."
Mm-hmm. And again, it goes back to our philosophy, done playing by the rules, because a lot of people think that this is a topic that you should not talk about. It is very personal, and so therefore a lot of people don't talk about it and they don't seek help for their mental health issues. And it's a topic that we actually love talking about. So get ready.
You know why I think we love talking about it? And you and I have said this before, because my family, so my dad's side of the family has horrible heart disease, and my mom's side of the family has horrible mental health. And no one ever talked about it. So when I started having trouble with it, I had nowhere to, like, nothing to bounce it off of. And then as I became an adult, my mom was like, "Oh, this person had this, and this person had this, and this person had electroshock therapy, and this person had to be institutionalized, and this person had to this." And I was like, "Okay, so," and I mean, I knew about my mom's mental health struggles, but I didn't know how hereditary it was and how much of it we had in our gene pool.
And a lot of people still aren't clear on if it is hereditary. I see a strong link, but I've had doctors say, I'm not sure, especially when it comes to like anxiety. Other mental health issues, they definitely have a link to, but with anxiety. But my family has a strong history as well, and it has a clear path. I struggle with it. My dad struggled with it. One of his parents, I won't name who, but one of them struggled with it. And I think it's very, very prevalent thing
and
for
I was thinking
majority
about
of us.
Yeah, and I was also thinking about that in terms of, like, I loved talking about nature versus nurture. So yes, I had the predisposition in my nature, but I also grew up with some childhood like turmoil. When my mom got sick and no one was telling us what was wrong with her, which I've talked about before, and like, I don't know, I think I was 10 or 11, and she was like a normal mom. And then my dad remembers her. He said she woke up one day and it looked like somebody had put different eyes in her eyes. And he remembers that day. He was like, "I went to an auction. I left early because I was worried about your mom." And she was like, never the same again, he said. And so I think that because of the turmoil I had having a mentally ill mom from prepubescent to now, so nature and nurture. So I had the genetic predisposition. Then later on, I would be diagnosed by therapists as having hypervigilant child syndrome, which is a thing that kids get when they are raised in stressful or alcoholic or drug dependent households, because you have to, I was the oldest, so you elevate to a parent standing before you're ready. And so you're always looking for like the next thing to happen, the next fire to start.
I've never heard of this, but that is me.
Welcome. There's books on it.
I'm going to have to research that.
My last therapist in Minnesota had books on it, and I had never heard it until her either. And I already had my own kids, and I didn't know I was a hypervigilant child, because once you're a hypervigilant child, you're always a hypervigilant child, because that just is how your brain works. And I'm still so high strung. And so I think I had kind of the perfect recipe. And that's what something that you and I have talked about is like, your mental health struggles started much, much younger than mine. Like, I have no discernible memories of having mental health issues until I was like 17, 18. And you told me, which I didn't even know was possible. I just always assumed mental health stuff started when you were 17 or 18. Do you want to talk, like, when do you remember your first struggles?
It's a blurry line between kindergarten and pre-kindergarten, because I went to kind of like what we did for our boys. I went to the same school for like pre-kindergarten. What is that? Pre-K and kindergarten. So somewhere in there. So around age 5. And I had stomach aches every single day. And it was always in the morning before school. and at night. And I would insist on like, and then I was like paranoid about getting sick. So I would ask to like sleep next to a trash can in case I got sick. My mom got diagnosed with cancer when I was 2.
Okay.
Well, right before I was 2, and started chemotherapy right when I turned 2. I personally believe a lot of this is kind of triggered by that because I saw her so sick and throwing up. And I asked my mom, and she said that like paranoid about her getting sick, and she did get sick in front of us a few times. Unfortunately, she tried not to, but you know, as a kid, you pick that up. I was always just not feeling great. But then on like weekends and summers, I was perfectly fine. My mom took me to the doctor and I was diagnosed with growing pains. So, which you can't do anything for growing pains except rest and try and eat healthy. And
Interesting.
yeah, and I was not diagnosed with anxiety until I was a senior in high school. So it was a long journey. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you knew kind of throughout your entire childhood.
But I thought it was normal. Off. I thought everyone had that, especially mine has always been exacerbated at night. And I mean, I struggle at night still to this day. And as a kid, I can remember just that they were panic attacks, but I didn't know that as a kid, and that heart racing and going out to my parents. And they would always say you had a bad dream because I would describe these visuals going on in my head. But it turns out that was just my mind racing because of panic attacks. And I kept saying, I'm not asleep. I'm not asleep. And they were like, you were having a bad dream. That's why your heart racing. That's why you can't sleep now. And I mean, I slept fine once I fell asleep. And so it was just like all these thoughts just wouldn't stop. And so I assumed it was normal.
It happened to me last night because my sleep was messed up last night. So I took a couple melatonin, and sometimes melatonin is my best friend and sometimes it is not. And last night it was not. And I was doing that thing, which I was diagnosed with insomnia when I was 18, and I can switch back to that, but I've always had sleep issues. And so last night, I know exactly what you're talking about. I was doing that thing where you start to fall. I used to call it drop waking, where you start to drop into sleep and you wake back up with like and so it was happening to me last night, and it was like a dream, but it was like Mikey, my youngest, ran out into the street and got hit by a car. Wake up. And then like, so it sounds like a dream if you're describing it to a parent, which makes sense. But I was fully not fucking asleep. I was fully awake. And so that brings me to so my diagnosis was when I was 18, and I was in college, and my dad came up to visit me to take me to lunch, and he looked at me and was like, you do not look right. Like, we're going to the doctor. And so he took me to the doctor, and I had not been sleeping. And I was having a lot of this, like, not sleeping through the night, the drop waking, and then the like scattered, like really vivid dreams, and like really scary dreams, and hearing things in my sleep. And I took a sleep study, my second sleep study last week. Like, sleep is always going to be an issue for me. So they diagnosed me with insomnia. That's when I got my first drugs. So did we both get our first drugs when we were like 17, 18?
I was a little older because that was when I first started seeking out therapy. And my dad turns out had anxiety, and I didn't know that before. His anxiety started when he had kids. He was petrified when he would read like an article in the paper about a parent doing something awful to their kids. He would then internalize that and be like, what if I? And he started getting paranoid. He was also training for marathons at the time, and I think that had something to do with it. He probably, I mean, he was in physical good shape, but not mentally. He had passed out in the shower, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And he didn't tell me until way later that he had to go on medication. And for some reason, he was anti-medication. He was like, basically like, I guess one night he couldn't sleep and he watched those infomercials, back in the 90s when those were on, maybe even 80s. And he had ordered these like books on tape, and it came to like a briefcase and came with a workbook.
God, I'm obsessed.
Yes. And he still had them and made me do them, and it didn't work. And
what was the like course ideology of it?
Basically like self-talk, like talk yourself out of it kind of thing, understanding what a panic attack was, understanding anxiety. Basically, like if you understand it, you can cure yourself kind of thing, which okay. Like,
so like baby steps into Scientology maybe,
right?
But like,
and I'm like, and he claims it worked for him, but I found out later he was on medication. And it did not work for me. And when I traveled, I would get really bad anxiety because, especially as a kid, you take away all a kid's comforts in an anxious kid. And I was always paranoid about sickness. And so I was like, people are going to get sick and I'm going to get sick away from home. And being sick away from home was like the worst thing you could do to me. So we were in Mexico and I got inflammation in my side, spiked a fever. Wasn't the first time it happened. My parents, at least, didn't know that like anxiety could cause inflammation inside your body. But I've had it for so long that it did. And I mean, I used to get like side pains, and that's how we talked about on another episode, and we'll talk about it again on birth control episodes. They diagnosed me with like oversensitive ovaries because they thought it was like cysts. Turns out it's all anxiety.
Which I think is so interesting because I did not know that you could get, and listeners potentially might not know, like I did not know you could get physical manifestations. I mean, I know about panic attacks, but I did not know that you can spike a fever, and I didn't know you could have inflammation, which I find is something that is what, like if we all just talked about this, if I saw that in my body, I would know that's a clue.
Right. Well, I mean, and think about it. I've been struggling with this since I'm 5, and here I am 18 maybe, and a big ball of nerves all the fucking time. Yeah, my body's going to start being like, hey, let's stop doing this. And so I went to like the little resort doctor, and they're like, we think you have appendicitis. Go to the hospital. So take an anxious person and put them in the hospital in Mexico.
Go get like appendicitis.
And talk about, right, anxiety.
Go get an appendectomy in Mexico.
Right? This was my favorite part. And God bless my mom. She just held it all together. And my mom never struggled with anxiety. So this did not make sense to her. But of course we think it's an appendicitis at the time. And they hooked me up to an IV. They put me in this tiny room. So I'm on an IV. So I can't really like do a whole bunch. And then they give me a small little cup and tell me to pee in the cup in this room. And I'm like looking at my mom and I'm like, what? How? And there's like no trying to figure out each other.
There's no toilet in the room, right?
No. Oh no. And
You're
there's like
supposed to pee into a thimble and then just
and
like
I'm like, do you
clench.
want me to go to the bathroom and like try and wheel this IV? And they're like, no, like here. And I'm like, so I didn't do it, obviously. Turns out they just diagnosed me with like, basically like IBS at the time. And that was like the start of our journey. And then I was traveling again at a competition. This was in my senior year of high school. So I guess I was 18.
What were you competing in?
Broadcast journalism.
Oh, fucking cool.
I will say we were champions in the state and second in the nation. So,
oh, girl.
Even with the panic attack, and I remember I was a zombie, and my mom
That's fucking cool. I was thinking it was going to be something nerdy like recorder competition.
And I was with my best friend at the time, and, I was just so nauseous in the morning. It was panic attacks. And of course, everyone's like, are you pregnant? And I'm like, no. And that was the first time we went to one of those like emergency little, like the little room emergency things, not like the actual hospital. And that was the first time somebody was like, you're having panic attacks. And so here I am 18 and like finally being told like, this is what it is. And I knew I had anxiety because at that point we knew enough about it.
And you knew enough about your own body to probably.
Yes. But I didn't know all these like times where I'm sick, it's actually panic attacks.
And I could not I've had such a like long history with anxiety and depression to know and I still had no idea it could manifest in physical symptoms, which shows how you and I are so open to talk about it, and we research so much. Like we literally were sending back and forth articles about it today, weren't we?
Yeah.
And I still didn't know that. And there's a lot I still don't know. And I think that there's a lot that if we all started talking about it, we'd all have a bigger bank of information to help our doctors diagnose us.
I think something that happens is a lot of doctors and a lot of people talk about anxiety. And I don't think they talk about the varying levels of anxiety, depression, panic attacks, mental health in general. Because I know a lot of people that do have anxiety. My brother has developed anxiety since my mom passed. And when he describes it, I can relate, but I don't think he can understand my general anxiety that has no correlate. Like when I was a kid and I was anxious, I would beat myself up because I'm like, why am I anxious? I am in a secure home. I have parents that love me, that feed me. I'm active. I'm healthy. There is no reason for me to be anxious and to be having panic attacks, but yet I am. And so I think that was like a really big thing still today. And so those of you that are struggling with that, like, I feel you. I get you. I hear you.
I feel you. I get you. I see you. And I think that's a really good point in that it's a spectrum disorder. Like, there is situational anxiety. There is just like like I am diagnosed with major depressive disorder for
Okay.
life. And I am diagnosed with anxiety disorder, but it like my depression is major and here to stay. My anxiety kind of like does a teeter totter back and forth depending on what's going on with my life and what's going on with my hormones and how many babies I've pushed out recently. And but it's always there. It's always kind of at a 3 in its best. But there's been times when it's at a 12 when I can't get my shit off the floor. And that's when I know it's time to go to the doctor. And you and I have discussed this. Okay, so let's do a quick rundown of the medications we've taken. And then we can kind of correlate them to what time of our lives they occurred. And then we can kind of talk about where we are now and what we know going back on. So my medication journey
I'm
took
ready
me a
for
while to write. I know you're so excited because we were talking to make sure we didn't have too many that overlapped. And I was like, I have 15. I have to look them up. And you're like, oh, okay. So I started on Trazodone. So Trazodone is a sleep aid. And so when I was initially diagnosed with anxiety, they assumed it was in relation to my insomnia. And Trazodone has been shown to have anxiety relieving effects. So they started me on Trazodone and kind of told me like, hey, you need to get more sleep. Long story short, we'll skip over. So my mom at the time was a full-on alcoholic. And
how old are you?
18, 19.
Okay.
So I'm in college. I might be 20 because I'm in my second house. And my mom and I were talking and she was like, well, you know, when I can't sleep, I just have a couple of cocktails and I sleep fine. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll do that. And she's like, but don't take your sleep medication on the nights you do that. Well, sleep medication is fucking boring and I'm in college. So obviously I'm going to choose the cocktail option. So
and PSA, if you have anxiety and alcohol are not usually friends.
Honestly, like not even just from like a psychological standpoint. That's what finally broke me was like, my drinking and my anxiety could no longer coexist. And so I had to pick like drop one and work on the other. And it wasn't like I was going to be like, hey, anxiety, you got to go. I'm going to hang. Like I had to be like, peace out. So while I'm drinking for sleep and anxiety and my insomnia and not taking my Trazodone, the doctor prescribes me Effexor, which you had never heard of. And one of my girlfriends did her like senior thesis on why it was so bad for you and was horrified that I was on it. And I was like, it's fine. Don't worry about it. But like, yes, I was drinking every night on top of it. So who knows?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So when she explained to me like it was not ideal, I switched to Cymbalta. And I didn't switch to Cymbalta until I quit drinking. So I, from 18 to 23, I want to say right after I turned 23, maybe, I was medicating with Effexor and drinking. And that was my anxiety. And when I decided that I couldn't drink and get my anxiety and depression under control anymore, I went on Cymbalta because I was like, you know what, I'm going to fucking quit this and dive like head on into this.
Yeah.
And so they put me on Cymbalta and Cymbalta was great for me. And I was on Cymbalta so I met Josh when I was like 26 or 27. So I was on Cymbalta that whole time. It was great. No weight gain. Wonderful. Loved it. And then Josh and I started getting really serious dating. And he was like, or I think I wanted to. I was like, I'm going to go off my medication because I don't think I should be on medication if we're going to try to get pregnant right after we get married. Because we were going to get engaged and we kind of knew what was happening. So I went off my Cymbalta and I am very fucking stubborn. So I think I stayed off for 2 or 3 months because I was like, I am not going to go back on until it's fully cleared my system and I can fully analyze whether or not I need this. And I fucking needed it. I was a basket case. I don't remember most of that time. I went through like the withdrawals weren't as bad as some of the other medications I've come off of, but it was brutal. I need medication. I am a person. I have tried to go off of it. I am not the kind of person that's just taking it lightly. Like I have major biological disorder in my brain and need medication. I fast forward. So I do Trazodone, Effexor, Cymbalta, go back on Cymbalta, get pregnant. And then they're like, well, Cymbalta is not approved for breastfeeding. And so I'm like, fuck. And so
it's fine when you're pregnant.
Who fucking know? I mean, they never
as fine as it
pulled.
can be.
Yeah. They
Okay.
never pulled me off of it.
Okay.
But it wasn't safe. It was like a one schedule too low on safety for breastfeeding.
Mm-hmm.
So me and my OB were working to wean me off Cymbalta. And so I was like going down on Cymbalta and going up on something else. And I took 3 medications. So Zach came 3 weeks early so our plan was to taper off Cymbalta for 4 weeks and then start increasing this other drug. But we had just started, and then Zach came 3 weeks
Oh.
early. So in the hospital, they pulled my Cymbalta and put me on whatever was next.
Mm-hmm.
And so I cycled through after Zach 3 medications, and I can't remember them all. But one of them was Prozac, and it was 2 months of just like panic attacks. And that's not to say that it was the medication they put me on, but it could have been just the withdrawal of hard stopping Cymbalta.
And hormones
like
from having a baby.
Hormones, like I have a 2-week or 2-month-old baby. They hard stop my Cymbalta. I go through 3 medications in 2 months, and then we finally settled on Zoloft, which is the one that you and I have in common.
Yeah.
And so so I was on Zoloft for 2 years, then I did 2 years on Trintellix, which is they call it like Wellbutrin without the panic. So if you have anxiety disorder, they often won't give you Wellbutrin because it can heighten your anxiety. And so Trintellix was this brand new drug, and you had to like jump through a lot of hoops to get it approved. You had to have like 3 prior authorizations, and like it was crazy. And so I took that for 2 years, and then started checking my hormones. And so then I ended up, right now I am currently on a thyroid medication, which helps with my energy. My whole family.
Do you have thyroid issues?
Yep. So I didn't know. I have very low grade. My sister has like very high grade, and a lot of my dad's side of the family has thyroid issues. And so I'm currently on a thyroid medication, and I only bring that up because hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism are super important to bring into this discussion.
Yeah, because I've had mine tested so many times.
Right. And it is, if there's something wrong with that baby, like you're never going to get your anxiety and depression in order. I'm sorry. No. Like it's impossible because you're just a basket case, or you can't get off the floor. And that's how I knew. I literally had a day where I couldn't get off the floor. I was laying on the floor wrestling with the kids, and they got up and left. And Josh was like, "Are you going to come?" And I was like, I can't do it. And he was like, "You're going to the doctor to get your meds checked." And so I did Trintellix for 2 years, and I'm on thyroid medicine, and I'm currently on Xanax and Prozac. The Xanax, I started off at 0.5, and now I'm on 1. And my doctor doubled it because I was having a lot of issues. And then I was just in the last 3 months diagnosed with PMDD, which we can talk about, because you and I also didn't know anything about PMDD until I was diagnosed. And I think that is something that more women should talk about, even though it's embarrassing and has to do with periods and things that are so good. Like, don't talk about periods in public, ladies.
You bleed? What?
Oh my God. Don't even, today has been like Dexter over here. I'm not even kidding. That's my medical like history. And I do want to come back and touch on PMDD, but I want to hear what your medication history is.
Okay. So you ready to hear about my anxious brain? Because my list is short. My list is short.
I'm surprised how short yours is.
You struggle more with depression and causes anxiety. I struggle with anxiety. I have had, since I've been older, I've been diagnosed with depression twice. I've gotten out of both of those depressions, but they were caused from severe anxiety attacks that I could not mentally get out of.
Okay, like you said, mine's like the opposite. Like my anxiety comes from my depression, and your depression comes from your uncontrolled
I did
anxiety.
not struggle with depression until after my son was born. So,
but yours were like kind of pregnancy related depressions, weren't they? Or were they different?
No, the one I was not pregnant for. I think it was just life in general. I had a really, really bad depression, which I am very open to talk about, but I don't think right now is like the time because
we're going to do an episode that's like a full-on trigger warning episode where if people are interested, we were talking about this. If people are interested, we want to give you all the gory details, but we also don't want this episode to be triggering. And so we're going to keep it like very like tip of the iceberg. But if you want us to go to the bottom of the iceberg, we will, if you just let us know. But we don't want to
I would love to talk to anyone who's going through it.
Absolutely, because it gets real fucking dark.
Right. And so I don't know if mine was pregnancy related because I was pregnant. My mom died. Our fucking 4 of our dogs died, including my mom's 2. My mom was supposed to be my birth doula, and that was out. And
I never knew that.
And my dad had Alzheimer's. So
oh my God.
Who knows if it was hormones or life, but yeah. So, right. And so I've also been diagnosed with OCD, but it's related
I didn't know
anxiety.
until today. And I love a good OCD, which I'm not making light of it. My brother has it severely, or had it severely. I don't know what his current status is. But I think it is something that I think the most shameful thing you can talk about almost is OCD. And why is
I used to get like really offended because people would call me OCD not knowing I had it because I'm a very type A person. Yes. And people would be like, oh, you're so OCD, or why do you have to be so OCD about it? And it used to offend me so much. And now I'm just like, thank you, because that means I'm very organized, or thank you because that means, and I've tried to like flip it because I know that their definition of OCD is not the true definition of OCD, because I've struggled with it.
I think that's very important that you differentiate that too, because I, since knowing someone that has OCD, try to make it a point to not use that in flipping that with you're so type A. You'll hear me say like, you're so type A. You will often not hear me say you're so OCD, but I think that's very important probably.
I liked that bra pop, by the way. If anyone's wondering, that was a bra pop.
I promised I wouldn't pop my bra at all today. And how many times have I done it?
That was the first one, and I just had to laugh.
I'm wearing kind of a good bra today, so I'm excited.
Sounds good. Very secure.
It's laundry day, so I mean things are up and where they should be.
Right?
Because all my comfy bras are in the wash. But I think that's an important. I appreciate you saying that, because that makes me feel, because I'm very like up, like never say OCD, because you don't know if the person actually knows someone with OCD. But you saying that you feel that is, you have flipped it in your head to be a compliment, and maybe not everyone has that same feeling, but that makes me feel better that there are some people that can hear it as a joke and still take it without it being.
And it wasn't always that way.
No, but I think that's important that you say that, so people think before they just call someone OCD. Like if you know someone with OCD or you have OCD, it's not a fun thing for you to say.
But I mean, that's today's society too. Like we're a lot more sensitive about everything, the terms we used. I mean, I would hate to say some of the terms we used growing up.
No.
And now you don't even think about saying them.
Say them all, Jenna. So, let's get our podcast canceled on episode 2.
So my list is very short, because part of my anxiety is I am scared of change, and I am scared that I will run out of medications. And so I will exhaust the medication until it does not work. So
into the ground.
Oh, yes. So I started, first of all, it took me forever to find a therapist I love. So if you are out there and you are going to a therapist and you don't think it's right, go to another one, even if they're in the same practice. My current therapist is in a practice where I saw someone else who is like next door to her, and it was really awkward at first, but I'm like, this is what I needed. Yes. So in college, I finally found a therapist, and she was wild red hair, not what you would expect.
Yeah.
And she was fucking amazing. She's exactly what I needed. And she was the one that said, you need medication. You cannot get over this hump unless you have medication. I'm not saying you have to be on medication for your whole life, but you need it.
Yeah.
And she said her first symptom, or her first sign that I needed it, was I was sitting in her office and she saw me counting her ceiling tiles and going, I'll try and describe this so that, because you guys can't always see it, like finger to finger, like touching each fingertip back and forth.
Yeah.
As I said, and my other ball was in a fist, and I was in as tight of a cocoon as I could be in a chair. And she was like, is this how you always are? And I had no idea I was doing any of those behaviors until she said it. And even when I went to go get medication, I had to go to another doctor. She said the same thing. And then I was like, oh, my stomach doesn't have to be in a ball 24/7 when I started medication. And it was a glorious thing. But they started me on Lexapro and Klonopin as a mixture.
Okay, tell me. Okay, so I've always tried to get Lexapro because I've heard such good things. And I have heard of Klonopin, but I know nothing about it. So what is obviously we are not medical experts, but what is your synopsis of each one for people that don't have experience with them?
So now I know. Okay, so let me pause there. So that was in college. And then I was like, I'm good. I can get off of it.
I'm good.
That's always how it happens. And then right before I got married, I started having panic attacks again for no reason. Went back on. I went to the same doctor. I said, can I get back on this? They were like, sure. So they put me on it. Then I got off of it again because I was gonna because I was pregnant, and I cold turkeyed it. If you want to know what they're called like brain zaps. Google it. It'll tell you exactly. It feels exactly like that. Brain to teeth zaps.
I can feel it right now. You're just saying it.
Right? And so now I'm at another therapist because I've moved. We're in Virginia and I am on Lexapro and Klonopin. And I go to this therapist and she was like, how long have you been on Klonopin? And I was like, well, this is my third time. And so this is after my son was born. And I'm like, this is my third time. Da, 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 da. And she was like, so years. And I'm like, yeah, definitely. She basically told me that that's not healthy because Klonopin is more of like a emergency drug.
Okay.
Like things are out of control.
Yeah.
I need to get over this hump. I'm having a really hard time. I'm about to go through a stressful situation, not an everyday use. So I had been having it as an everyday use. So of course, then I start spiraling.
Yeah.
And I went to the doctor who prescribed it and she was like, yeah, definitely. Like, we don't want you on this forever. And I'm like, why has no one ever told me that? Even when she prescribed it to me, she didn't tell me that.
It's fucking annoying.
Right? And I know.
I'm mad. I'm upset now and I don't know any of I wasn't there.
I know.
This is over. And I like it's so true though. If you aren't advocating for yourself and checking up every 6 months or a year and being like, can we negotiate this contract?
Right.
You get fucking just stuck into a filing cabinet.
Yes. And I will say when I was pregnant with my son, I went off of it and I was perfectly fine. I got back on it after because my mom was passing away. This is my depression. So this is my first depression. This is when I had to seek out help. So they put me back on Lexapro and Klonopin, and it was a bad depression. It was scary. It was hard. It had a lot of anxiety. And that's when I was told, I think you're having anxiety, which has led to depression because you're going through a very depressive situation. But I mean, I was having all these panic attacks as well. And it was a mess.
Okay, so we're not going to get into the specifics of the dark times we said on this episode, but can I just ask, was it a long duration of little things or was it like a couple of really big, sharp things that happened to send you back on medication?
I can tell you it was like 3 days of bad anxiety and I hit a bottom. And I remember first yelling at my husband and my son and the dog. And that's how I'm like, oh my gosh, my anxiety is coming back. And then it just never went away. And then it was depressive. And so then I got pregnant again. And during this, my mom is passing away or has just passed. I'm not sure. So I get off my medication and I was still on Klonopin because I just couldn't quite get off of it yet. And I take everything off cold turkey and I'm about 30 weeks pregnant now. So I've been off medication pretty much the whole pregnancy. I found out very early. I was like 4 weeks when I found out I was pregnant and stopped medication. And I hit the worst depression I have ever hit. It was beyond scary. So then my midwife was like, let's put you back on Lexapro. She assured me it was as safe as it can be for pregnancy. Of course, nothing is safe. It is a safe.
You know what else is not safe? Being unmedicated in the darkest.
Well,
so like
and
you
she
have
knew
to,
that. Yes.
Yeah, you have to really weigh nothing is safe for pregnancy, but you know, an unmedicated manic depressive is also, and manic depression is a separate entity, but like there, an unmedicated pregnant mother is much unsafer than
and I will say, like, you've heard me push for midwives because they are a godsend. And I went to a midwife I had never seen and she struggled with very similar issues and I just cried and I was like, and you're functioning and you're okay and she was the sweetest. And then my regular midwife that night called me and emailed me to make sure I was okay and called me the next day. So if you don't see a midwife, PSA.
I told my sister that you see a midwife and she was like, oh my God, I saw a midwife last time and it was the best experience. And she doesn't even have kids. I was like,
you don't have to have kids to see a midwife.
Guess what? I didn't know that either. So I've never seen a midwife. I am like so jazzed about it because when I leave Virginia, I have to find a new OB situation and I love my current. So I'm down.
Right. So now I'm pregnant, depressed, scared out of my mind and feeling guilty about taking this medication when I'm like 32 or 33 weeks pregnant. So they put me on Lexapro and I don't know if it was the hormones or the fact that I didn't have Klonopin with it. It was awful. I was sweating. And this is just in the first 24 hours in my panic attack. It's panic attack after panic attack after I cannot breathe and I am sweating. I am shaking. And so I called the midwife and she was like, I don't want to say give it time because this sounds miserable and you're very pregnant. And so she switches me to Zoloft and talks to me for like an hour because I'm a mess. And I'm like, are you sure this is going to work? Is it da-da-da? and I have been on it ever since. I have increased it once. I was on the lowest dose because, again, I'm always paranoid about topping out, and I've had
Give
to
it
increase
lots of
it
room
once.
to grow.
I know. And my midwife even was like, when I increased it, she was like, "You are fine. It has been." My daughter's 3 now. She's like, "It's been a year. It's natural to have to increase. We have so many options." She has to reassure me every time. But I'm on Zoloft. Yeah, I'm not going to say I'm anxiety free, because there are situations. And I think that's another misconception. There are situations that set off my anxiety, but it's manageable, and it's not something that I am having panic attacks every day. I'm not having racing heart every day, all these things that associate with anxiety. So
yeah, and I have an uncle that, and this is just a quote that I love from him. He is basically like a gruff Clint Eastwood, like mental health doesn't exist. But he has said to me, there's a certain amount of anxiety that is normal to being a human, or we wouldn't survive. And people should not aim to have no anxiety, because a certain amount of anxiety is necessary to the proliferation of humankind. Like,
it's what pushes you forward to do stuff.
Yeah, you have to be nervous you're going to get hit by a car crossing the street. Like, that's just how the world works. But unmanageable, chaotic, crawling on the floor anxiety is not what proliferates the human race.
Right.
So differentiating between the two is important.
It very much is. And I will say that I have also tried all the natural supplements under the sun. As a kid, my parents had me on St. John's wort. I don't know if you remember that big kick back in the day.
That was a hot topic on Phil Donahue, honey.
Right? And this is, I mean, I'm like 12 or 13, I think. Yes. And so I tried all that. I've done the food testing. I will say diet plays a role, but for me, it's not the solution. I know if I eat gluten and a lot of sugary foods, I'm also a vegan, so I don't eat a ton of, I don't eat any like animal products. And
you're a vegan that just dabbles in meat eating.
Just a little bacon on the side. But I will say that since I have gone vegan, I used to get tummy issues with my anxiety, and I still do. I still get, if you know what the dump is, you know what I'm talking about in terms of anxiety. But I used to get it every time, like a bad cramps, to where if I went to a friend's house, I was paranoid it would happen, and I would take a heating pad with me. Yeah. Because anxiety, of course.
Yes.
And since I've gone vegan, it has not been like that. I do not get the cramps. I don't know if that's just like a dairy thing or what, but
I think it's a dairy thing. Yeah. Okay, but I find that, so we also, and you and I had discussed this before, this is our first like friend of the podcast. Like, so we wanted to talk about like Western medicine, and then we also want to talk about like the alternative medicine side. Right. So I think there is a place. And so I had a friend of the podcast that is very open with her struggles reach out to me today, and I snapped my bra again. She's going through a hard point in her anxiety, and she's in the process of being tested for OCD. And she asked me if I'd ever taken Lexapro, because I'm very open about what medications work and what medications don't. And I said, no, but I've always wanted to. Like, I've always wanted. It's like restaurants. Like, I've always wanted to try that restaurant.
Give me a side.
And so I said, I think my co-host on the podcast has done foods, because she said she's going to do food sensitivity testing. And she's going to they're talking about Lexapro, and she's being tested for OCD. And I was like, and then she was asking me if I'd ever used CBD oils. And I had said, yes, I have tried them. I haven't had a good experience with them, and I haven't had a bad experience. I just had a null experience, but I know that you have used them. Have you used, and I don't know what your success has been with them or lack of.
So in high school, I smoked marijuana for my anxiety, not for my anxiety, but I did it, and I know it was a coping mechanism.
Okay.
So I assumed it would work. CBD oil would work great for me. I didn't do oil. I did gummies. They did not. They made my forehead hurt, which sounds so weird, but I think that's a place I keep a lot of tension. And so like the whole time I'm like, why does my forehead hurt? And then I felt okay. But then the next day, my anxiety was heightened and my stomach was a little funny. And I noticed that both times. And I did the gummies, and my brother got them from California. So, he got the good shit.
Yeah. And that's what I'm wondering, because I think
too high of a dose.
I think there is a differentiation between CBD oil and gummies, because I think the gummies do have some THC in them potentially. And we might have to do a whole nother correction podcast on all of this, but I have gotten good high grade CBD oil, and she and I, the friend of the podcast, and I were talking about she said it makes her anxiety worse. And I said,
Mine too.
same. And I know friends that don't even have anxiety that have said the day after they take an edible, their anxiety is high, like similar to a hangover. And
yes,
anxiety and hangovers don't mix. Anxiety. And I think that's also very interesting is that you have talked about how yours is mostly anxiety and you used to use marijuana as a crutch, which makes sense. And mine is mostly depression and I used alcohol as a crutch, which also makes sense because those are very common coping mechanisms before you know how to doctor correctly and medicate correctly, or you can't, or you don't have insurance in college, or this, that, or the other thing, or
you don't want to tell anyone that something's going on. So you just say, what can make this go away? Well,
or you don't want your parents.
Duh.
Oh my God. And you know what helps insomnia? Just fucking passing out on alcohol. Guess what? You're not going to have insomnia, but you're going to wake up sick as shit and anxiety beyond belief. Like,
yeah. And if you're out there and you think, you know, I need medication, feel free to be open about it. Feel free to reach out to us about it. But if you are receiving shame, I got shame about it because
by who?
By my parents. My mom told me it was her biggest fight because my dad was anti-medication. My mom was like, I went to the hospital with her twice, actually 3 times, because I went once in college as well. And I see that this is a very real thing. My mom's like, I don't understand it, but something is not right with our daughter and we need to figure this out. And my mom told me she had guilt because looking back, she was like, I saw signs now that I know what it is when you were 5. But, you know, I just kept telling her, you had no idea. But if that is you, you don't have to be open like we are about talking about it. It can be your little secret. But just talk to your doctor, your midwife, your OBGYN, your anyone in the medical profession you can talk to. I did not know. I thought, because I got my first medication through a, what is it? Psychologist? Is that right?
So psychiatrists can prescribe medication.
Okay.
Psychologists cannot.
Right. So that's how I went the first time. Then when I got put back on it, I didn't realize I could just get it from my fucking PCP. And I would have been like,
isn't that the greatest? I get mine from my OB, honey. Like, check my downstairs and check my upstairs and let's call it a day.
Right? And now I get mine through my midwife, which is, to me personally, it's so much easier because I see her yearly. The communication with my midwife is very open. She has been there through everything, all my life changes, including losing parents. And to get an appointment with her is so much easier. Versus if you're even trying to see, or even a therapist in general, like do these online ones, because sometimes if you call, they might say it's a 2-week waiting window. And when I was in my deep depression, I couldn't even call. My husband, God bless him, had to call and he had to say, this is basically a life or death situation. She needs to get in to see someone now. And they don't fully understand that. So even if you can't get into a therapist, at least go see your OBGYN, go see your doctor, go see someone to get your foot in the door, because it is so important.
And be brutally honest about it. And then another point that I wanted to make, you and you've read Untamed, right?
Oh yeah.
I was going to say, get the fuck off this podcast. This is our Bible.
Right.
And you will read it. Get off the podcast and go read. I knew you had. But so she talks about an Untamed, which I think is very important if you're new to this whole thing. Your worst days, go in your journal and write how you feel on your worst days.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
2 weeks later, when you get a fucking appointment, you can be like, because you'll feel fine in 2 weeks. Or you might not feel fine, but you'll probably feel a lot better and you won't remember. It's kind of like childbirth. Like you don't remember how bad it is. But if you can go back to that like journal and be like, oh, so I'm going to read this to you. This is how I felt in my darkest. Then they can properly diagnose you instead of like, by the time you get to the appointment, you're like, I don't know. I felt bad when I called, but I don't know. It was like whatever.
And we're so good at downplaying it. I will say, one of my good friends, I'm not going to name her for privacy issues.
Friend of the podcast, number 2.
Friend of the podcast, number 2. I made her do this because she kept describing anxiety and some depression to me and saying, I need to go to the doctor. And then she would cancel her appointments or be like, but now I feel fine. And I was like, write it down. And now she's on medication and she's fucking thriving. And I was so proud of her for going.
Bravo.
Right?
Because it's friend of the podcast.
Yes. And even sometimes just walking out your front door to go to your appointment, you start to feel better. And you're like, well, I wasn't feeling great, but now it's not so bad. And
Oh my God, you're
downplay it. It's
completely right.
ridiculous what we do to ourselves. So
It is. It's bananas. And I think when you're in the deep spots, you need to write it down so you can remember it when you come back up. And another thing that I don't think is getting as much attention is, so I am in the process of starting to do testing for ADHD, which is if you dive into like adult diagnosis of ADHD, it's very interesting. But you can like perform well in school and have made it fine through the 90s without needing medication and done fine in college. But they're finding now that a lot of women who think that they have depression actually have ADHD, or anxiety actually have ADHD. And a big tip of this, and I learned all this from Nikki Glazer, who is a comedian, and she's done a couple of podcasts where she talks about, she was having, this might be triggering, so I'll keep it very basic, but she was having suicidal ideations, which are different from suicidal attempts. And we can talk about this in a further podcast, whether or not we've struggled with this. But she said once she figured out it was ADHD and started taking the proper medication, those suicidal ideations went away and her whole world opened up. And you have to go to a psychiatrist to get that. My OB cannot diagnose me with ADHD. So now I have to get on the, so I have to get on the psychiatrist wait list, which I have to wait to do till I move to Chicago, because you can't, which also pisses me and my therapist off so much. We had a big vent session. You can't see therapists in other states, even though telemed is a thing now. Like all of my therapy appointments are telemed, but I can't see my current therapist when I move, even though she's all telemed. So she was like, I'm hoping that COVID will change some of these regulations so that you should be able to have a continuation of care when you find a good therapist.
Right. Especially since everything's online now.
And I also think a big thing that we learned, and I'm sure, did you learn this from My Favorite Murder, our other favorite podcast? Going on Psychology Today is such an important resource for anyone out there, because you can go to Psychology Today, put in what type of health insurance you have, filter out therapists not seeing new patients, and filter out therapists that aren't what you're looking for. And then you can also like click in to filter like your biggest issues, and they will recommend therapists to you. And then you
did not know that. Cool.
That's how I find my best therapist. And also never settle for a therapist.
Never.
I have gone through,
no matter what their ratings are.
I've gone through 3 since I've been in Virginia, and I've been here for 2 years. And
I'm on my third as well.
I am very thankful to Karen and Georgia, My Favorite Murder, for empowering women and repeating it 100 times until it got through my stupid thick head to not settle for a medication that just makes you feel okay, and to not settle for a therapist that is just okay.
Because it's the anxiety and the expectation and all of that. We are scared to speak up. Speak up for yourself, especially when it comes to mental health, because that is so important. And you'll know when you find the right therapist. So if you're questioning it, don't be like, I'll give it another session.
Yeah, no.
You're paying good money, and this is so important. So find one that works, and they should understand you're not the first person to have searched around for a therapist. We've all done it.
Completely agree. And they don't get hurt feelings. And if they do, then they're really
in the wrong profession.
They're in the wrong fucking profession. Another thing I wanted to mention on friend of the podcast question regarding food sensitivity, my anxiety, and like you said, gluten affects you. I have had food allergy testing, and I am allergic to the sulfites in wine and something in soy sauce. Both of those, if I ever eat those, or if I have too much sodium, will trigger my anxiety the next day, or right at the time. Like if I were to drink wine with sulfites, I would instantly get hives up my neck, and I would instantly start feeling heart palpitations. And so you can go to your regular doctor and get a food sensitivity test, and it's covered by insurance, and you can say like, I'm having, and they'll just give you the basics. I mean, it's a bunch of pokes in your back. It doesn't really hurt. But I think I think exploring it from a Western standpoint with therapy and medication, and exploring it from a alternative medicine standpoint, all of these are important things, but you are never going to get a foot in the fucking door if you're not advocating for yourself. And advocate for your fucking kids.
Yes.
That's
and I want to touch on the food sensitivity and come back to the kid thing, because that's really important. But real quick on the food sensitivity, I did the Everly test and I really liked it.
Okay.
That's the one that you just like order online. My husband got it for me.
And it's a finger prick, right?
Okay. And it came up as like cheddar cheese and stuff. And it was interesting because it was very true, because at the time I was doing CrossFit and I was eating more dairy than usual because I was a vegetarian, not a vegan yet.
Yeah.
And I was having basically like arthritis, like a 90-year-old. And then I cut out cheddar cheese or dairy in general, and it all went away. But I will say if you have access and financial means to go to a naturopath to do it, they're trying to get it. There's this huge push right now to try and get it covered by insurance because it's not, and it's very expensive. But I did an old school food intolerance test, and it's so different than an allergy. Intolerance is basically something you're born with and it doesn't develop, and it will always be a trigger. And mine were so weird. They're fruit with sugar, so like jams or pies. I know. And potatoes. And my body just has a hard time breaking those down. And so and cheddar, dairy didn't even show up. And I don't know if it's because I've been a vegan for so long, which it shouldn't matter. But now I know, like, I had to do combination ones to kind of figure it out. And I'm not perfect about either one, but I know the repercussions. But yeah, it's really interesting. And so there's so many different types of food. So there's food allergy, which is like you're actually allergic to. You'll have like a physical reaction. And there's food sensitivity, food intolerance. And so just maybe explore them all if you have the means.
Which you and I are both gluten sensitive, but we, like, my sister has full grade, highest level celiac. I have a gluten intolerance, which means I get like upset tummy.
Right.
But like, and you manifest, what is your gluten manifestation?
So I've been struggling with hives for almost 2 years now.
Okay.
And
I knew yours was something more physical. Okay.
Yeah. But the gluten in general, it's always been an issue for me. It just causes inflammation in my body. And it's something I know. And it causes heightened anxiety, but it's a buildup. Like if I have one piece of bread, I'll be fine. But if I eat it like 2 days in a row, then I'm going to be like, oh, and then if I keep going, we're going down a rabbit hole. So,
I can't.
Yeah.
Tell us on another episode where it's just Jenna's bowel movements. The whole episode.
We need some sound effects. Ew.
But I think that, and that's what you and I's big thing is on this podcast, is our goal in Done Playing by the Rules is to talk about things that people don't talk about, to normalize it. And we want to also piggyback off that in talking about things that aren't talked about, and we want to talk about them in front of our kids.
Yes.
Because guess fucking what? We have a high likelihood of having kids with mental health issues, even if their lives are perfect.
And not just that, like, think about what our kids have gone through. Like, I know a lot of people have said their kids are struggling with anxiety. Like, their whole worlds have changed.
Their whole worlds have changed.
Let's just throw in there that our oldest watched our parents pass. So there's that, there's trauma, there's everything. And I would love to do an episode eventually on trauma and kids.
Yes.
But I think that, like, I know personally, like when my dad was like, you don't need medication, like that put a level of shame on me to where I tried to hide anything. And so then I stopped telling my parents about these anxiety attacks and stuff. And so if we can be open with our kids about us, it teaches them to be open. And if your kid has anxiety or depression, they're going to be okay. Just support them and love them and get them the help they need. Or even your spouse, your significant other. Like my husband has been a godsend through mine, but it's not something he understands because he does not have anxiety or depression, but it's something he has supported me in. So even if you yourself don't, like, support those that have
support your spouses, because maybe your husband is the one that needs you to call and say he's laying on the floor right now. I don't know what's wrong with him. He needs to see someone this week. And
today.
And I am reading a book right now, which is obviously fiction, but it's called The Push. And it's about a mom that starts seeing mental health issues in her child, but she's too ashamed to say anything because her husband is, it's the best fucking book. And again, I'm going to celebrity name drop, but maybe Nikki Glazer and I were DMing back and forth about what a good book it is, but it's so good. And so she posted about it last night and I was like, I'm in the middle of reading it. Like, it's so good. And she was like, here's the other books I'm going to order. But it's a thing that we don't want our kids to stand out. And this woman in the book is trying to protect her husband from thinking that he doesn't have a perfect wife and a perfect child when the kid is fucked up. And like, if you notice things about your kids, like I took Zach to therapy after my dad passed because he was having super acute anxious moments, or after my dad's motorcycle accident. So this would have been 2 years before he passed away, but after he suffered his traumatic brain injury. And sometimes kids need a little therapy. And guess what? Guess how resilient kids can be if they're given the tools. So Zach needed 2 therapies and was basically like cured because they taught him how to do breathing exercises and explained to him like, yeah, what you're going through is scary. And like sometimes when you're in the throes of not understanding what's wrong with your kid, you can't verbalize it, but a therapist can. And I just really want to advocate for if something feels off about your kid, get ahead of it. Don't wait for it to turn into something bigger, because the quicker we can give them the toolbox to heal themselves inside, the less traumatic and long-term any sort of therapy is going to be.
And that goes can't say for that for people in general. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And we can't say that for everyone. There's people that have like long-term, deep-seated childhood issues and trauma and things like that. But like there are situations where you can get ahead of it and like treat it. But if you're in it for the long haul, I have a girlfriend that has a teenager that's in it for the long haul. Keep advocating. She advocates the shit out of that kid and takes him to every doctor she can. And he is living a normal life where maybe 50 years ago he would not have been, because she will not stop fighting for him.
Yeah. If my mom didn't fight for me, I mean, who knows what would have happened.
Yeah. Like, and I felt the same way when I went and had to decide to stop drinking. I went and I was actually in the hospital for a little bit while they evaluated my medication, like to put me on a new medication and to like get me off drinking. The hospital I was in, I think I was there for like a couple days. I was like, oh, they're having an AA meeting this afternoon. And my dad was like, don't go to that. You're not an alcoholic. And I was like, oh, okay. And so like my dad, who is someone that has always been very open and loved me unconditionally, put an instant shame, like notation on that. So I relate to what you're saying about like, if you feel shame from a parent, you're much more likely to kind of just like try to suck it all in, which doesn't go away. You can't swallow it down and like poop it out. Like it's going to sit in your stomach in a ball of nerves, like you said, until you deal with it.
We are going to have an episode on like kids and resiliency and big emotions. And I think that is going to tie into all of this so much. And it's going to be about our children in general and us. And that's one I'm really, really excited for.
I'm excited about the resilience episode. I'm excited if people want us to go deeper into this. I'm happy to go deeper into it. We're going to do an episode on our family's history with alcoholism, because both of us have intermittent alcoholism throughout our families and ourselves or not.
Spouses. All of it.
All of it. And we're going to do episodes that are going to have trigger warnings at the beginning, and we'll be as open as people want us to be. But we also just want to advocate for therapy and mental health.
Yeah. And no matter how like hippie you are, like I see a naturopath doctor and a midwife, and they are okay with my medication because they know sometimes you need it. And my naturopath has tried like everything under the sun. And I have read articles and I have tried to let myself get off the medication, but you know what? I've had to accept that this is who I am and this is what I need. If my therapist told me, like, if my arm was broken, I wouldn't be walking around with my arm hanging off. No, I would go seek help. Like, that's the same thing with medication.
And I've had to explain it to my husband because he doesn't have a history of mental health in his family and he doesn't necessarily know it. And I say, Josh, if I had a tumor in my brain, I'd get it taken out. Yeah. I instead don't have enough serotonin in my brain, so I have to get it put in. Like that's what SSRIs are for me. I am getting serotonin put in when you would get a tumor taken out.
Exactly.
It's just
so that brings us to our closing little slogan. And this is kind of where it stemmed from, because we have been very open with each other about therapy and meds and our other friends as well, because it has a stigma attached to it. So as always, remember to call your therapist.
And take your meds.
2, 3, 4, put me in the slammer, put me in the straight jacket. 'Cause I'm a criminal, I need some medication.